Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, with Dr. Eric E. Lopkin. And, there are certain times in my life, Dr. Lopkin, that I'm on my way to work and I start, thinking about maybe some friend did something really stupid or something I saw, and to start laughing to myself and wonder sometimes if the person next to me thinks I'm crazy. And I have to thank Uncle Joe for this one because in a number of speeches, not just one, commemorating his that his uncle passed away defending this country in the Pacific Theater, and basically he said that his plane was shot down and he was eaten by cannibals. Oh boy,
Yeah,
your
this,
thoughts if there are any.
there have been so many ridiculous stories coming from Biden. The fire in his kitchen that almost took out his house, that barely, singed the curtains. The loss of his cat in that potential fire. His
Oh, by the way,
professorship
real
is
quick, when he equated the loss, when he equated losing a cat to the people that lost their homes and loved ones in
yeah,
Hawaii, that was pretty bizarre. There you go.
yeah. He
But
said
it's
so
getting worse,
many of
Doctor
these,
Lopkin.
but this one reached new heights because his own administration, the Department of the Military, actually came out and said there is no evidence that his uncle was shot down. His uncle was a passenger in the plane. Not,
Here you
this was
go.
supposedly a single engine plane. No, it was a much larger plane. There were passengers. His uncle was one of the passengers. It was lost at sea. No evidence that it ever
There you go.
made it to Papua New Guinea, which is where he said the cannibals were. And the leader of the leader of Papua New Guinea has come out and chastised Biden for this story because how dare you disparage his country with this ridiculous story? So, not only is this demented fool making up stories, now he's making up stories that are offending our potential allies.
And I'll have to throw in there if it was anyone else, if it was Trump, the calls of racism would probably be still going on for at least another month.
Oh,
When
yeah.
Trump called Haiti a shithole, I mean, it was like God, offending the Pope or something. You ever been to Haiti? There you go. But this was hysterical. How racist, and then he repeated it twice.
Yes.
But it is
Uh,
not getting better. There's not getting better. And let me just think about this, Dr. Lopkin, in your comments, because I think this is really important. So Trump's tied up in court, and he has a gag order on that. Well, we can elaborate on that. But one thing I thought about, and I'd like your elaboration on this and your thoughts, is that if you had, let's say, President Clinton, not Hillary, God forbid, out there with his opponent tied up in court, probably a death knell to that opponent. But actually, it actually might actually play. I'm not talking about the legal issue, but to have Uncle Joe out there unbridled, it just, in other words, it's a gift that keeps. Let it speak for it. When your opponent's digging his own grave, let him keep digging. I mean, you cannot. It's gotten so bad and funny and comical that he can't get through. Even today, he was shuffling off the. He looks like the Walking Dead.
well,
The more you see him, the more it's getting comical and scary. Go ahead.
Yeah, the fact that he has to be on the campaign trail may be Trump's greatest asset because Biden is
Yes.
screwing up so often. Earlier today, he gave a speech. He was obviously reading it off of the teleprompter because he
He said
read,
pause.
yes, he read pause during the speech because he's
Twice.
not
Twice.
cognitive enough to understand the difference between a stage direction and what he is supposed to say. It- you know,
Yes. So, how do you think? But this is a huge question because here's what I really believe. Two things I believe. I believe number one, if Biden gets in, we're all screwed. So you can throw all that hard work on Modern Observer out the window. Sorry to tell you that. Okay, my retirement, whatever. Good luck. But anyway, so if he gets another four, the world's screwed. Okay. Um, and I believe this number two, and I'd love your comments on both. If Trump gets acquitted on this trial, then he's the president. Your thoughts on both? This
Yeah,
is the last ditch effort.
I think that an acquittal is going to go a long way, and you're starting to see more and more liberal pundits say that this case against Trump should never have been brought. They don't see any legal way
their
of
bets.
I don't even think they're hedging their bets. I think they're in full-fledged panic because they know when he beats this. And at this point, it does look to be on the legal basis of the case, a when he beats it, not if, because there is no case there.
May I interject one thing?
Yep.
Dr. Lopkin, no, Dr. Lopkin, this is support you. I'm sorry, but no, I chose the wrong words. I didn't mean hedge their bets because I agree with you. So I want to be clear, not just because I have to agree with you. They're basically being proactive. They're getting ahead of the story, knowing that it's going to blow up. I'm sorry, but is that what you're trying to say too? Okay, yes, I'm sorry, I chose the wrong words.
Yes, that's correct. They know this is going nowhere. They know that even if the jury convicts, and let's face it, 90% of registered voters in New York City are Democrats. So finding an impartial jury was next to impossible. That being said, they know no matter what the jury finds, it's going to be thrown out on appeal. The Trump team has already said they are going to appeal. And it does not look like, this judge makes appealable error after appealable error. He has done so many things that would cause this to be thrown out, not the least of which was refusing to recuse himself when his daughter is a Democratic operative and he himself has been a donor to the Biden campaign.
No question about it. I think, though, there's bigger wins in Trump's sails if there's an acquittal or a hung jury. I think then the momentum is unstoppable because you juxtaposed his victory lap and then mumbling, stumbling, cannibal fearing Biden out there. It's not a good look.
No, it's not a good look. And the Democrats know this. This is why you're seeing absolutely ridiculous comments out of people like Hillary Clinton, who the other day said, all Trump wants to do is throw his opponents in jail. Really? What do you think the Democrats are trying to do to Trump? Meanwhile, if there was any truth to the idea that Trump wanted to throw his opponents in jail, Hillary would have been first. But as Trump supporters after the 2016 election were yelling for her, they were yelling, lock her up. Trump was the one that said, we have to let bygones be bygones, and did not, despite the fact that she actually committed crimes. So, there's just no basis in fact or sanity to Clinton's comments.
Yeah, but wait a second. But Hillary has no basis in fact. She has become clinically deranged. She has never gotten over 8 years ago, and literally Trump owns her mental space. What's ever left of it.
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true.
There you go.
She's never been able to recover from losing in 2016. And I think, she knew that the Democrats did their best to rig 2016, which is why in close races, she refused to call for a recount, because she knew all the dirty tricks would be uncovered. And the fact that she still couldn't win after losing the primary to Obama, she just never recovered from that.
Couldn't happen to a nicer person. I heard a rumor that Keith Richards left her house saying the drinking's too much for him. There you go. Speaking of too much, we have I like that. I'm on a roll today, aren't I? We have the new. It's not the Ivy League. I'm going to rebrand it and call it the Hamas League. We have Columbia, NYU, and others, Yale, and Columbia is basically shut down. Um, your thoughts? It's just mind blowing. And I want to throw in before you give your thoughts is that Dershowitz was Alan Dershowitz, 85 now, was on in an interview and he said basically he he blames in part DEI because he talked about some of the professors at these Ivy League schools that he petitioned against them getting tenure because they were not qualified. These are people that don't have the intellectual capacity to be. Plus, it's just the entire indoctrination. So it's a multi-phase indoctrination process. But at the same time, you have more and more young people opting out of college and going to trade school. This is not a good look for the Ivy League and college in general. It's really not good. Not good branding. Your thoughts?
No, there is now no doubt, quite possibly in anybody's mind, that there is no value to an Ivy League education.
There you
You
go.
know, it wasn't that long
So
ago.
the 90, wait, hold on, 90% of people, students in Yale, get A, 90%. Just want to throw that out there. So very, very robust learning going on. I'm sorry, go ahead, my fault.
It wasn't that long ago that you and I were talking about the fact that with what Biden had done to the economy, the US had reverted to the 1970s. Well, now we've continued the trend. We have reverted to the late 1930s. This is not about
Mm.
Hamas anymore or the Ivy League anymore. This is a return to fascism and Nazism. This is
No
raw,
doubt.
naked anti Semitism. And it is absolutely unbelievable that people who are literally yelling, "We are Hamas," are not being arrested because they're saying it on the private property of the universities, and the universities refuse to press charges. Identifying yourself as a terrorist is not protected speech by any identification of the First Amendment. It is literally hate speech. It is a crime. And yet, the only thing that any of these protesters has been charged with is trespassing. And they're not even being processed, so they're not getting a criminal record. These folks need to be arrested. They need to be processed. It needs to be on their permanent record that they have a criminal record. If they are American citizens, let them get due process and be arrested, charged, and tried. If they are not American citizens, throw them out, revoke their student visas, and deport them. These are crimes. They are.
Yes.
There was video the other night on ABC Channel 7 in New York of them assaulting police with bottles. This is what AOC is referring to as peaceful protests. This is
Same
not,
same with the New York Times, by the way.
yeah, these are not
Yeah, they
peaceful
called it a peaceful
protests.
protest.
These are assaults. There is Columbia, a Jewish Columbia professor. He has been barred from the campus. The excuse is that they can't guarantee his safety. In reality, it's because they don't want him counter protesting.
Yes, that is true. Now, you had some really good analysis as always, but what do you think of this, Dr. Lotkin? I think raw anti-Semitism, which is now one of the core values of the left, it was always guised in the cloak of anti-Israeli, which you can, or anti-Israeli policy in the Middle East, pro-Palestinian, which you can, most people can somewhat digest. Okay, but now that it's given free reign, the raw hatred is there for everyone, on display for everyone to see. The only people that don't see it are people like our esteemed Senator Richard Blumenthal, who usually has never met a camera he does not just like, has basically lusted after, but I haven't seen anything from him. Your thoughts first on the concept that it was always put behind a veneer of Mideast policy. Now, the raw anti Semitism, which was always behind the anti Israeli movement, is now there for everyone to see and experience.
Yeah, you cannot claim that this is an anti-Israeli movement when the protesters are yelling death to America, when they are literally saying that Jews should go back to Poland. Okay, if that's not a callback to the Nazis, yeah, and being exterminated, I don't know what is. So this has nothing to do with Israel anymore. This is raw hatred of Jews. And I will point out, if these same things had been done against African Americans, if they had been harassed, if African Americans were told, go back to Africa, nobody would be standing for this. But for some reason, it's acceptable if you're doing it to Jews.
No question about it. And the comparison should not go unnoticed because that was the beginning of the Nazi movement in the early 30s. Started out with protests banning, which happens in New York, disrupting Jewish businesses. Fast forward 7, 8 years later, you have the Holocaust. Is that extreme? Yes, it is extreme. But violence against Jews, discrimination, I don't see that as something that can't be realized in the near future. And especially when you have a president, everyone got down on Donald Trump when he really didn't, but they said he did. They said that there was moral equivalency, in Charlottesville between Nazis and the protesters. But our Uncle Joe, I know he was very upset because he was remembering his uncle that was his own uncle that was eaten by cannibals. But he did say that, yes, he's against anti-Semitism, even though he hasn't really done anything about it. But he also is against or stands up for people who understand and is not for people who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians. Basically, drawing equal an equal playing field between Israel and Hamas. Uncle
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah, not only is he trying to equivocate the two, but the Biden administration has actually come out and said that they are holding Israel to a higher standard than they are the Palestinians. They are actually holding Israel to a standard that no country in history has ever been held to. Israel was the country that was attacked. They were not the instigator, and yet they are being held responsible for everything that is being done to the Palestinians, despite the fact that it's Hamas that has kept the aid from getting to the Palestinian civilians. It is Hamas that is hiding within the Palestinian communities. They are the ones putting the civilians on the front lines. They have kept the aid from getting to civilians, causing the famines that these people are talking about. None of this is being caused by Israel. And ironically, there are Palestinians that live in Israel, and they have been very vocal saying, no, Israel is not at fault here. The protesters don't know what they're talking about. And we've seen this over and over again. We've seen the Palestinians that live within Israel standing up for Israel. We have seen Iranian citizens standing up for Israel because they know what's really going on. And these
How come Ivy Leaguers don't? How come Ivy Leaguers don't? And how come you talk about Hamas? You're talking about in the present situation. Israel gave the Palestinians autonomy, and what they promised it would be the jewel of the Middle East. It became the hellhole of the Middle East, not because of the Palestinians, because of Hamas, who took aid, they could have had a very good economy. Now there were problems. Don't get me wrong. They were right. Trading partners, aid could have been flowing in. What did they do with the aid? They bought weapons and tunneled into Israel. So who's to blame here? Geniuses of the Ivy League.
Gaza could have had a booming economy. They were given everything they needed to build ports, to bring in exports, to be able to build up an amazing economy. And Hamas stole those resources in order to build their tunnels, in order to smuggle in weapons and to build weapons in some cases, as primitive as those weapons might have been. But this was done to the Palestinians by Hamas, not by Israel. And it is absolutely amazing to me how, and I've seen this again and again, these protesters are saying, oh no, October 7th, no women were raped by Hamas. That was debunked. No, the UN, who is not exactly a friend of Israel, came out with a report documenting that women and children were raped, were attacked, were beaten, that hostages that have been released have come forward and said they were raped multiple times. And yet these people are so dedicated to their own ignorance that they go, oh, no, that's just not true. It didn't happen. And if these are Ivy League students, this is yet another reason not to send your kids to the Ivy League. Because if they're turning out people who are this stupid, for God's sakes, send your kids somewhere where they're going to get an actual education.
And we talk about that in kind of jest, but I'm not so sure that's not happening. I mean, if you're making a decision to hire, if you're making a decision, I remember I spoke with someone, it was not a professional interview, but was saying that his brother owns a really successful company and basically told him that he's not really big on the Ivy League because it's not about Hamas or either, but they just don't fit in.
No,
they're
they
not
don't
on the same wavelength. And
they don't fit in because they're not learning. They're being indoctrinated. And unfortunately, this is not the first generation to be indoctrinated, which is why it's so insidious. This has been going on for decades. They indoctrinated people, and then those people are now the professors that are furthering the indoctrination. And the longer this goes on and the more it happens, the less prepared these students are when they finally hit the real world.
I don't know if they'll ever be prepared. How does that sound? But you're talking about the voices of reasons or the voices of traditional liberals, especially Jewish liberals. Again, I would have to say, where is Blumenthal? Where is Schiff, who never said no to a camera? Raskin, the conspiracy theorist, and then you have Chucky Schumer, who basically undermined Israel in the middle of a war, and now is kind of getting some of his own medicine because outside of his little Chucky's house, they have the radicals protesting against any aid to Israel. I wonder if Chucky's on vacation now.
Yeah, well, aid to Israel passed the Senate yesterday. It passed the House last week and is being signed into law by President Biden today. So they're yelling and screaming about aid to Israel. is fortunately falling on deaf ears because this went through on a massively bipartisan basis. Why? Well, the Republicans have been pushing for this, all along. But with the exception of the squad, the Democrats all know they need the Jewish vote. They cannot afford politically to abandon Israel, despite the fact that the Biden administration is trying to play both sides of this because he's terrified of losing Michigan and Minnesota, which, quite frankly, it is now very plausible that Biden is going to lose Michigan because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now on the ballot there. So while these protesters and these wacko left wingers are never going to vote for Trump, they may go out and vote for RFK.
Oh, they could easily vote. And you had mentioned something where we were prepping for the show that I thought was interesting. Some liberal pundits, including our friend Dickie Blumenthal, basically calling for Sotomayor to resign now because she has some medical issues, diabetes in particular, because they're so convinced that Trump's going to be in.
Yeah, Justice Sotomayor is 69 years old. And of course, these folks are saying, well, that's past the average age of retirement. She's not, by any stretch of the imagination, the oldest Supreme Court justice. There are two justices. Alito is one. I'm forgetting who the second one is, both of which conservative justices that are both older than she
Probably
is.
Thomas.
Yes, Clarence Thomas was the other one. They're both older than she is. She has type 1 diabetes. Now, if you know anything about type 1 diabetes, this is something that people tend to get fairly early in life. So, this is something she's had for years, if not decades. And now, all of a sudden, they're concerned because with type 1 diabetes, she might not be healthy enough to stay in her position for another 4 or 5 years, which means if Trump wins the election, he could appoint another conservative justice, making a 7-2 conservative majority. Now, the only reason to bring this up for these pundits and for Blumenthal is if they're convinced that Trump is going to win. Otherwise, why would you push out somebody who, quite frankly, I mean, I don't agree with her legally. Certainly, I don't think she's got a lot on the ball. And politically, I don't agree with her at all. But there is no reason for her to retire now. She still has many good years ahead of her. There's nothing wrong with her health now. Diabetes is completely manageable. So why would you call for her to retire? And the only reason is they are convinced Trump is going to win. And what I find even more amazing is that while they're so concerned that Sotomayor is not going to be able to make it through the next 4 years, they have shown no such concern for Biden, who is 11 years older than Sotomayor, suffering from dementia, has had multiple health scares. This is somebody whose health is in jeopardy that they're not concerned about. Quite frankly, I'd be more worried about that and trying to get him to put somebody else on the ballot in his place rather than worrying about Justice Sotomayor. And the Washington Post put a brilliant article out. I'm not sure when. It was in the last few days, might have even been this morning. I saw it for the first time today, where they're speculating that would they be calling for her to retire if she was a man? Is this simply sexism?
No, it's ideology. And one thing about liberals that I have absolutely learned, they're ideologues and everything, no pun intended, trumps their ideology, including their religion, the good of the country, anything. If they really cared about America, they wouldn't have Uncle Joe, uh, the uh, the the purveyor of America's demise and totally unfit for the job in office. But it's all about power. And speaking of power, though, we have some New York House of Representative members calling for the president of Colombia to resign. That's more than I can say for the people that we've mentioned. So, uh, in in this podcast.
Yeah, and despite the silence of so many in the Biden administration, in the Congress, in the Senate, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson met with Jewish
Yes.
students at Columbia today. He came out, went to the campus, spoke to the students, called for the president of Columbia to resign. If this doesn't tell Jewish Democrats who is really on their side, nothing will. And
God.
quite frankly, I'm very disappointed because we mentioned earlier there was a Jewish professor at Columbia who has been barred from the campus. Again, they're claiming it's for his safety. In reality, it's because they don't want him
Yes.
counter protesting. But he has been appearing on television, he has been making speeches, and he is consistently defending the Democrats. He's claiming, well, this is just a small percentage of the Democrats that are doing this. It's like, guess what?
He's a fool.
That small percentage wouldn't be able to do anything if the larger majority of Democrats didn't kowtow to them.
Thank you. Cowards. Someone who's not a coward is Robert Kraft, who's pulling a lot, not all, to certain select funding efforts and initiatives are still going forward. A lot of them related to his own religion, but he's pulling most of his funding away from Columbia. He's what you call someone that is a proud Jew, unlike the basket of deplorables we previously mentioned. Am I not correct, Dr. Lobkin?
You are. And in fact, he has done more than just pull his money. He has actually formed a nonprofit who the foundation's purpose is to defend against anti-Semitism. So he is putting his resources behind an entire organization to fight back from this. Where are the politicians in all of this who have done nothing? Where are all, I mean, we've seen some Wall Street financiers pull their support from their alma maters because of this, but we haven't seen enough. Business owners now need to step up and say, you know what? We are not hiring anybody from these institutions until they clean house. That's what needs to be done. They need to say, we are not donating a dime to these institutions until they clean house. And more importantly, speaking of putting your money where your mouth is, the Wall Street houses that manage the endowments for these universities need to step up and say, you're on your own. We are not here's your money. We are not managing your endowment unless you clean house.
I love that, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin. And I will say one thing they should also instate is Mr. Sherman's GoFundMe project, which would be don'thirethisperson.com. Perfect opportunity to launch that business. You can't have the stars are 100% aligned, and I think it'd be perfect and it'd be just dessert. How do you like them apples?
Oh, absolutely. If you are out there protesting, I certainly hope that you are going to find that nobody is going to hire you. You have just proved, one, that you are ignorant, 2, that you are abusive, and 3, that you cannot operate in an environment that needs to have
Thank you.
people of all religions and all races, creeds, colors. So
And all
why on earth,
viewpoints.
and all viewpoints, yes. So why on earth would we allow you into our companies?
I would agree. I do have just one more thing before you leave this. Victor Hansen, who I really love, he's a very smart person. Has no business at the Ivy League because he is intelligent. He cites, I'm sorry, and it goes back to some of these liberal. It all goes back to liberal policies and ideology. He says a lot of this is that 20% of a lot of people over a certain age or under a certain age in America are not domestically born. And yeah, that can be a good thing if you have people that are vetted, people that come here for certain reasons. But when you have just an open gate of people who really don't give a shit about American values, American culture, then guess what? Surprise, surprise, Gomer Pyle. That's what you end up with Hamas inspired nutcases. Sorry, that's not the problem, but it is a part of the problem, Dr. Lopkin.
Yeah, it's the problem itself goes deeper than that, but that is a key to it. The problem is we used to have immigrants that came to this country who were
There you go.
anxious to assimilate. They wanted to be Americans. Now,
Yes, yes, yes.
it's not just immigrants, but it's entire generations of people born here as well. And we saw this back in the early 90s when then New York Mayor David Dinkins started promoting the
Genius.
idea that we were not actually a melting pot. We were a mosaic, and everybody had to keep their individual race identity, cultural identity, and not share it with everybody else so we could all benefit and be real Americans, because that is what an American is. An American is the result of all of the cultures that have come here. It is the result of everybody, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, sharing their ideals, sharing their cultures, sharing and adopting and becoming that melting pot. Well, when when the left started getting rid of the idea of the melting pot, that no, you're not really an American. You're wherever you came from and you happen to live here. It's like, no.
And why melt? And wait a second, why melt into a country that is a racist, greedy, pig virus? It's something you don't want to aspire to. That is also part of it.
Yes, that is
There's
part
nothing
of it.
special about
When
America.
when you're building the idea that America is at its core systemically racist, why would you want to be part of America? Well, quite frankly, if you honestly believe America is systemically racist, leave. This is not China. You don't need the government's permission to move. You can go anywhere you want. So if you're so dissatisfied with America and you don't think it can be fixed by becoming an American and working towards making America better, and that is at the core of America. If you go right back to the founding, it is um to build a more perfect union. And I know grammatically you cannot be more perfect. Either you're perfect or you're not. But these words were chosen specifically because we knew we weren't perfect. But becoming more perfect is that we aspire to get closer and closer, that we would all work together to make the country better and better. Are we ever going to be perfect? Probably not. But we keep striving. And when you yell death to America, when you threaten people with, to and harass them and want them dead, It's like, that is not building America. And that is what we have now.
Yes, that is correct. And it is permeated throughout not only academia, but a lot of society, unfortunately. But you know something that's interesting? Do you ever have someone that's screwed up in life and they say their advice is learn what I do, what I've done, and do the opposite? That is actually true with General Motors. As everyone stumbled and fell over each other to get into EVs, General Motors, who a long time struggling company, did the opposite. Bigger, tougher, gas powered cars, and guess what? They're doing exceptionally well. I think that is hysterical. I'm sure John Kerry will probably, if he was still in office or still part of the cabinet, would probably put sanctions against them. But it shows people don't want your stupid EVs. It's not ready yet, genius.
No, GM is doing amazingly well. They have announced that they are
Crushing
opening
it.
a new corporate headquarters in Detroit, which is helping a real estate boom in Detroit now. So they're not only doing well for themselves, they're helping their community as well. And the core of why they're doing so well is a lesson that every business needs to heed. It is because GM ignored the Biden administration and listened to their customers. That is
Yes,
what
yes, yes,
businesses
yes,
need
yes.
to do. Listen to what your customers are saying. They are the ones that are paying your bills. They are the ones you need to serve. And the fact of the matter is, it's not about satisfying politicians. It's not even about satisfying investors. Because if you satisfy, as GM has just shown, if you satisfy the customers, then your investors will be very happy with the result. So you need to pay attention, not to these loud little groups that don't know what they're talking about, but to the people who are actually buying your products and services.
Dr. Lopkin, I'm sorry to say, I have another great business idea. Too bad I lack ambition at my stage of life. But here's my gold star business consulting idea. It's called the John Kerry solution. You have a problem with your business. You invite John Kerry in. You ask him what the company should do, and you do the opposite. And basically, your stock soars on Wall Street. So you invite him in, ask him for his opinion, and then you do the opposite, and then you're probably in very good shape. A
Yeah,
multi-billion dollar idea.
you can actually
The
expand.
John Kerry solution.
You can actually expand that out. It's not simply John Kerry, but anybody who has spent their life in politics without having a real job, which, let's face it, is most
Grifter, yes.
politicians at this point. We don't have a Congress full of people that were successful in business and then decided, all right, you know what? I've made my money. Now I'm going to devote my life to public service. In fact, those people that do that, like Robert Kraft, don't do it by running for office. They do it by starting nonprofits and starting foundations to fund nonprofits. So, any advice you can get from a politician about business, you are well deserved to succeed if you ignore them.
And you do the opposite. Another multi-million dollar idea. Well, Dr. Lopkin, it was a multi-million dollar podcast today. Another great podcast. Our listeners who are growing in numbers, aren't they, Dr. Lopkin?
They are. And of course, we want to hear your opinions. Let us know what you think of these issues. Go to the Carnivore Radio Facebook page and message us your opinion. Let us know what you think. You can also go to xvadio.com/connect. Tell us what you think there. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Radio at xvadio.com, the Carnivore Radio website, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.